Thank you to everyone for coming. My name is David Rosenthal. I'm a teacher here at Shalom Torah Academy, and I run the Manalapan Jewish Connection, where we provide inspirational Jewish programming for the Manalapan community. I'd like to welcome to all the Shalom Torah parents. Welcome to all of our guests. Please help yourself to some coffee and cake. Device addiction and dependence is not a Jewish issue, it's a human issue. In many ways, we've become slaves to our devices, and our humanity is being destroyed. We've become habituated to not be able to think in more than a few seconds. We don't read, we don't think of ideas, we don't spend quality time with our families. How often have we seen families on vacation or at dinner at a restaurant and everyone's on their phone? While this is not a Jewish issue, it's especially damaging to the Jewish people because we're known as the people of the book. We pride ourselves on learning, thinking, and contemplation. We study the Torah to discover the will of God, Hashem, and ponder our purpose and how to fulfill it. If we can't think for more than a few seconds, how can we accomplish any of these goals? While we won't change overnight, I hope that this meeting will awaken us to take back control of our lives and the lives of our children and the many issues that confront us. In our school, we'll be having, this is the beginning of a very exciting initiative, which Rabbi Jacoby will be speaking about after the presentation. Before we begin, I want to thank the many people and organizations who made this event possible. First of all, thank you to Shalom Torah Academy for hosting us tonight. I want to thank our head of school, Rabbi Sharp, and our dean, Rabbi Kramer, for hosting the event. I would like to thank the rabbis of the community for showing leadership by recognizing this issue and deciding to do something about it, and taking concrete steps to do what we can to ameliorate this problem. And I want to thank the specific rabbis and community organizations which contributed to this event and helped sponsor this event. Also, sponsorships are still open. If you're interested in being a partial sponsor, please come over to me after the event. First, I want to thank Rabbi Leiter and Union Hill Congregation. Several months ago, Rabbi Leiter showed me Dr. Kersting's book, and I was just like, wow, people have to know about this. I want to thank Rabbi Chazanov and the Chabad of Western Monmouth County, Rabbi Oratz and Monmouth Torah Links, Rabbi Kipper and the Jewish Learning Center, Rabbi Brodkin and Congregation B'nai Israel, the Jewish Federation of the Heart of New Jersey. In addition to our sponsors, I'd like to thank those who worked tirelessly for this event. Rabbi Jacoby, who's also a teacher here and director of our development, not only for his effort on this event, but his effort for the school in general and for the different events in the Jewish community, the greater Manalapan Jewish community. I would like to also thank Ms. Allison Kaplan for her help in this event, springboarding ideas, and all of her assistance. Also, I want to thank Ms. Chaya Littman, who's the head of our graphics department here at Shalom, for her help. Also, I want to thank Rosie and the staff, janitorial staff, for setting up the room. Finally, I would like to thank Mrs. Hoberman, our principal, who's been a steadfast supporter of this program since its inception. It's been a pleasure working at a school and a privilege with such a dedicated and supportive administration. Okay, that was second to last. I want to thank Rabbi Kramer for not only supporting this program, but his involvement in the nitty-gritty details of tonight's event and his steadfast work for the school. And with that, before the lecture tonight, I would actually like to call on Rabbi Kramer to share a few words of inspiration. Rabbi Kramer.
Thank you, Rabbi Rosenthal. So before we hear from Dr. Kersting speak about something which all of us know a lot about, and I was talking to one of the parents, one of the community members actually, before the event, and he was saying that it would be so cool if he shares like an angle or a thought that's like insightful, because we all know about technology. This is not a challenge that is foreign to any of us. But before we hear from Dr. Kersting, I'd like to just share a couple of perspectives, a couple of thoughts and ideas to keep in mind. The first is, and this was a very powerful insight that I heard from a friend of mine back in New York, and he said that the starting point of dealing with challenges is you need to be appreciative and thankful for the challenge. You need to be thankful for the challenge. The reason why we're here on this world is to grow. I had the opportunity today to step into the 5th and 6th grade class, and I was talking to them, what's the purpose of life? And one of the kids said, to become great, like a superhero. And he's right. That's the purpose of life, in a nutshell. To become great. It's an opportunity at greatness. We don't get to choose how we are going to be challenged to become great. But when we are challenged, we have to be appreciative of the opportunity that we're given to become great. And the challenge of technology is insidious. It steeps its way and puts its tentacles into every aspect of our lives. And it's an amazing challenge, and therefore, an amazing opportunity to become really great. So that's the first thing. You need to be thankful. Once you're thankful, you'll have energy. You'll have a sense of initiative, of optimism, of being able to do something about it, even if the challenge seems daunting. The second thing, and the second perspective is you need to act. You need to do something. Even if it's not big, but you need to do something. You need to take the inspiration from tonight, and you need to take some sort of step towards the direction of bettering yourself. And one little step in the direction of bettering yourself will concretize all the inspiration that you've gotten. It will make you into a much better person, and you will therefore be able to model that for your children, your family, and your friends. I was inspired by Rabbi Leiter, the Rav of my shul. He's been talking about the challenges of technology for a while. I was also prodded along by my wife, who wanted my attention more fully when I came home. And I took the step 6 weeks ago to delete WhatsApp from my phone. And the thought of it was on my mind for a few weeks. It was on my mind for a few weeks. I felt trapped. I felt I can't do it. Finally, I took the step. I deleted it from my phone. I still have it on my computer, but not on my phone. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to try it just for a week. In a week, I'm going to put it back on. I didn't put it back on. I'm very happy not having WhatsApp on my phone. But you need to take a step. Even if it's not that big of a step, even if it's just a phone box that some families have, that they come home, they put their phone in a box and put it away for an hour or two while they spend time with family. Whatever that small step is you need to take a step in the direction of the inspiration that you're going to experience. And finally, I would just like to thank the rabbis of the community, Rabbi Rosenthal, for putting this together, and for the sense of growth and initiative that there is in this community. I joined this community 5 years ago as part of the administration of the school, and I have to say, it's an inspiring community to be part of. It's a community of people that there's no social pressure to do what they're doing. It's a community of people that take initiative in almost every area of their lives. They take steps to do what's right, even when it's not popular. And it's really an honor to be part of this community. Thank you very much for coming. I hope you're as inspired as I will be, Be'ezer Hashem, and I hope to be very inspired from Dr. Kersting's insight. And, where was it?
Thank you, Rabbi Kramer. Okay, now what you came here for. I'd like to introduce Dr. Kersting. Tom Kersting is a nationally renowned psychotherapist, author, and television contributor. He's the author of Disconnected, How to Protect Your Kids from the Harmful Effects of Device Dependency. Tom has traveled the country delivering this important message. He's appeared on The Today Show, Good Morning America, and Fox News. He has hosted shows for A&E, the Food Network, and Oprah's Wellness Network. Tom knows all the latest research, studies, and facts about the dangers of overt device use. He's the founder and owner of Valley Family Counseling Center in Park Ridge, New Jersey. We're honored to introduce Dr. Thomas Kersting.
All right, thanks everybody. This is a pretty decent crowd for a Tuesday night. I'm glad to see that. So I'm just going to start off to tell you a little bit about myself, how I got into this topic and so forth. So I live in New Jersey my entire life, the northernmost part of New Jersey, exit 172 off the Parkway, which is an hour and 3 minutes away, except during rush hour, because it took me an hour and 45 minutes to get here. So I am a licensed psychotherapist. I have a private practice. I've been doing that for 24 years. In addition to that, I worked in a public high school for 25 years. And I retired from the public high school 4 years ago. And it was an experience at the public high school that led me to this. And this goes back a ways. All right, so it actually goes back to 2008. So in September of 2008, there was a committee in the high school that I ran that was known as the 504 Committee. So if you haven't heard of what a 504 plan is, a 504 plan in public education, maybe in private education too, is an accommodation plan that is provided to regular education students, so it doesn't fall under special education law. So if a student has some form of an impairment that may be impacting them academically, they might be eligible for accommodations under what's called Section 504. The accommodations might be extra time on tests and quizzes, preferential seating in the front of the classroom. So I ran that committee for many years prior to 2008. And the protocol is if a parent has a child that they feel has some sort of a disability or impairment and it is impacting them educationally, then they would call me, we'd set up a meeting, and my committee consisted of myself, a guidance counselor, a school administrator, a school nurse, school psychologist, and we would have a meeting with the parents, gather the information, and determine whether or not their child was eligible for accommodations. So this is the first meeting of the year, first week of September 2008. Parents come in, and they go on to explain that their 14-year-old son had been recently diagnosed with attention deficit disorder, and they were seeking accommodations, right? And when I heard that, I was quite puzzled because I had never seen that prior to 2008. We had never had a case of a student or parents coming in asking for accommodations for a recently diagnosed kid with attention deficit disorder. It was usually things like Crohn's disease, diabetes, and so forth. And the reason why I was confused is because I'll explain a little bit about ADHD. First of all, ADHD is a neurological condition that an individual is born with. The average age of diagnosis is 8 years old. And for a parent that has a child with ADHD, by the time that child is 5 years old, you can't not notice the symptoms. And the symptoms are inattentiveness, lack of focus, disorganization, and sometimes hyperactivity and impulsivity. So here we were, 14-year-old, very good school district, and what was kind of puzzling to me was I was thinking, how did this kid fall through the cracks? From elementary school to middle school, and now all of a sudden they're picking up on these ADHD symptoms. So I kind of just chalked it up as a one-off. Following week we have our next meeting, second meeting of the year, same thing. New set of parents, 14-year-old son, recently diagnosed with attention deficit disorder. Long story short, from that point on for the remainder of that school year, the majority of the referrals coming to our committee were for 14 and 15-year-olds being diagnosed with attention deficit disorder. So my head was kind of spinning, because it just did not add up. It's not the kind of thing where you just, all of a sudden, the symptoms reveal themselves at age 14. So it was at that point, in 2008, that I started doing, a lot of research to try to figure out what was going on here. There's got to be something that's causing this. And I came across the research of a renowned physician and professor out of UCLA by the name of Gary Small. And back then, around that time, Gary Small conducted a national research study called Your Brain on Google. So this is back like the internet, that's pretty much all we had. And basically what his team of researchers was trying to do is figure out what was going on inside people's brains when they're on the internet. So they used functional MRI devices, they could see different parts of the brain lighting up, and it got a tremendous amount of media coverage. And the media sort of headlined it like this: the internet is making us smarter because we're using more of our brains. But what really captured my attention when I was going through that study was a member on his team coined a term that he referred to as acquired attention deficit disorder. And what he meant by, so that's not an official term, but what he meant by acquired ADHD is that they had predicted that roughly 70% of kids that were older, that were diagnosed with ADHD, didn't have ADHD. They had the symptoms of ADHD, and it was caused by something known as brain neuroplasticity, which I'm going to get into in a moment. As I was doing my research, an organization called the Kaiser Family Foundation, back then in '08, conducted their second national survey on media use among kids between the ages of 8 and 18. And in that survey, it included only 4 things: television watching, video game playing, computer use, and portable music listening devices. So essentially, they wanted to get an idea of how much digital media kids were consuming. Now, they conducted that same survey in 2004, and their plan was to do it every 4 years. In 2004, when it came out the first time, it revealed that the average kid in that age group was spending 6 hours, 30 minutes per day using digital media. 2008 rolled around 4 years later, and they were hesitant to do the survey again because they felt it would be unnecessary, because they felt they'd reached the ceiling on the amount of time that there actually is in a day for that number to go up. They conducted it again anyway, and between 2004 and 2008, that number rose from 6.5 hours a day to 7 hours, 38 minutes per day. Anybody want to take a guess at what elevated that number that much by an hour and 8 minutes from 2004 to 2008? One thing, well, yes, 2 things emerged: Facebook and YouTube in that interim, and that elevated that number. So you fast forward to today, and there's plenty of research out there. It's estimated that the average kid in that age group is spending 9 hours a day, and so are adults, by the way. And in recent research studies, kids that are considered excessive screen media users are spending 13 hours a day. So why is this a problem, and what does this have to do with, with this acquired attention deficit disorder? So if you see this image up here of that brain, those tree branch-looking lightning strike things, those are called neural pathways. And each one of those pathways plays a different critical function in what it means to be a human being. So for example, if you look at this one up here, that may be the neural pathway. And these are the electrical impulses in our brain that are very important. So that one up on the right may be the neural pathway you need to be a good listener. The one on the left may be the pathway you need to be able to cope with adversarial situations. The other one may be you need to be a good, organized human being. So the things that we do on a day-to-day basis that are important, we need these neural pathways. Now let me explain what neuroplasticity is. So if you see this microphone, it's made out of very firm plastic. Raise your hand if you think I could roll this up into the size of a tennis ball and now have to catch it somewhere. Do you think I can do that? I can do that. Not because I'm the Incredible Hulk. I can do that because if I went out to the maintenance shed and got a blowtorch, I can now melt this and I can manipulate this. So like this microphone, the brain is very similar, hence the term neuroplasticity. Here's what that is. So any human being that is engaged in any form of activity that is considered highly stimulating for 3 hours or more per day, the brain will adapt and assimilate to that environment by growing new neural pathways. And we know that our kids aren't spending 3 hours a day, they're spending triple that in the most highly stimulating way. So the brain adapts to that by growing new pathways. And that might sound a little terrifying. It's actually not that bad. It's very useful in many respects. But something that is a little terrifying is something known as neural pruning. And what neural pruning is as follows. Any pathway that is either not being utilized or is underutilized, the brain will either weaken that pathway or prune away that pathway entirely. Fast forward now to 2012. I'm going back. So, by the way, when I started doing that research back in 2008, and this is a long time ago, it was then in March of 2009, what is that, 15 years ago, that I gave my first lecture on this topic. 15 years ago. And it was obviously a little bit different, but it was really more of a forewarning of what I saw coming, a storm that I saw coming that is now fully upon us. And as everybody knows, we've been in the midst of a major mental health epidemic among our kids. And, some researchers will say there's a correlation, between screen use and social media and all that. Does that have anything to do with it? I'm here to tell you that it's direct causality. And there's no debating that. It's direct causality. I'm going to get into all that in a minute. So from 2008 to 2012, I'm running that committee, at the high school. I'm going to my private practice after hours at the high school every day. And still the majority of the referrals were for kids being diagnosed, teenagers with ADHD. In 2012, something changed. A new sheriff came to town. We started to see a whole new disability that now took front row center stage. It was the majority of the referrals that we were getting starting in 2012, and it hasn't stopped since. And that is anxiety disorders. Now, 2012 was a very important year because 2012 is when smartphones became mainstream. So if you look at any data from prior to 2012, you look at mental health statistics among kids, it's pretty much a flat line, anxiety, depression. Early 2000s starts to elevate a little bit. Starting in 2012, it's like Mount Everest, and it hasn't stopped. And it was not caused by COVID, by the way. COVID, it was already here before COVID. COVID just accelerated that even more because our kids, their entire life is on their screen pretty much. So I guess the question is, so what does all this have to do, screen time and all that stuff, what does it have to do with anxiety? So here's how it kind of starts. Take a young kid, all right, from kindergarten through 3rd or 4th grade, and everything's hunky-dory, fine. They're doing well in school, no problems at home. They're hanging out with their parents, and no concerns or anything. Then they get that first smartphone, and pretty quickly, oftentimes, things begin to unravel. And oftentimes, the starting point is all of a sudden the grades start to slip a little bit. Then mom and dad are on top of them, right? You got to put that phone away. Your grades are slipping. And it starts to become an everyday occurrence, right? Where and it's pretty much the way it is in our society now. Where once that phone comes into the equation, there's daily bickering. So a household that was once kind of nice and calm and quiet has now the temperament in these households have now become sort of hostile, right? And anxiety, that's part of what anxiety is. Anxiety is a very contagious thing. And it spreads like wildfire, right? If you're among it all the time. So that's sort of the starting point. The next level, the next layer of this is once that child gets that smartphone, right? These little things start to happen. Next thing they start doing is they now friend everyone, through social media, right? They're now friends with everybody on Instagram, all of their peers. They have all these friends, streaks, followers, likes, all this stuff, right? And they begin to scour through the content of their peers that they're posting, the perfect selfies, the videos they're posting on TikTok. And when you're looking at a young person with a very impressionable mind, an adolescent, and an adolescent by nature, if I could give that a one-word definition, the word I use is insecurity. And it's always been that way. It's the way it's supposed to be. Because kids, when they're adolescents, are trying to figure out they're going through changes, they're going through puberty, they're getting pimples on their face, their voice is changing, and above all, they're trying to figure out where they fit in the social technique. And now we give them what I call the modern day weapon of mass distraction and mass destruction, the smartphone. In that already compromised state, developmental stage, what I call it sort of the purgatory stage. When a child is an adolescent, and they're not a child, but they're also not an adult. They're kind of stuck in this limbo place. And through history, a lot of kids have a harder time than others. So anxiety sets in, they can become depressed, and they usually slide out of that when they start heading into adulthood. But now you layer in, on top of that vulnerable stage of development, this phone and the scouring, what I call the human highlight reel of all of their peers, the perfect selfie, how they did on the math test. How many goals they scored in soccer, the vacation they're on in Hawaii, all this stuff. And in that vulnerable mind, and this isn't just an occasional occurrence, this is constant on a daily basis. That starts to seep into their thought process subconsciously. And over time, the gradual message that sort of sinks in for our kids is along the lines of this. Everybody else's life is so perfect. My life really stinks. Right? And it's not real, because none of that stuff is real anyway. That now complicates the anxiety, the self-esteem, and often leads to depression and so forth. Next order of business here is they want to get noticed now, so they start posting their own content, taking their own photos, searching for the streaks, searching for the followers, and all of the likes in an attempt to be noticed and hence feel good about themselves. But it does not work that way. So here's an important word. I refer to this in my book as cyber self-esteem. So I'm going to get into that in a moment. So when I speak to kids, I've been lecturing all over the country for a long time, except during COVID. I was on a roll there, and then I just the kibosh was put on that for a couple of years. But post-COVID, local traveling, right? So last week and the week before, I spoke to like 3,500 middle school kids and high school kids in Pine Bush, New York, over a whole series of lectures. Spoke to parents, board of ed. When I was speaking to the kids, what I always do when I speak to kids, when I get to this section, is I'll ask a kid in the front row, I'll say, who are you? I'm not going to pick on anybody here. And I am happy to see that there are kids here, by the way. So I'll say, who are you? And I already know what the answer is going to be. And I want the kids in here to listen to what I'm about to say very clearly. And it relates to what the gentleman up here was speaking about earlier. I'll say, who are you? And I know what they're going to tell me. They tell me their name. Oh, I'm John. Hi, John. How are you? Who are you? Oh, I'm Eli. Hi, Eli. Right? And so forth. And then I'll say to the kids, I'll say, all right, I want you to ask me who I am. And one of the kids will say, who are you? And here's how I respond. I say, I am not Tom Kersting. That's just the name my parents gave me. Now I want you to tell me who I am. Now I want to tell you who I am. And I'll go on to say that I am a caring, spiritual, loving, motivated, determined, charismatic, empathetic, powerful, great being. And then they all look at me like this. Right? And then I go on to explain to them that I'm not sharing that because I'm trying to boast about myself. What I'm explaining is that every single person in the room is all of that and more. But you don't know that and can't know that because you have to know self first. Right? Hence the term self-esteem. All the outside stuff has nothing to do with how a person feels about self. Otherwise, it would be called others' esteem, not self-esteem. So what I implore the kids to do, so all the kids in here right now, listen, that are here, this is what I'm going to implore you to do. And it's not complicated. So we know that our kids, particularly middle school and high school kids, when you look at recent research, they are on their devices, not a lot, constantly, all the time. All right? Whether it's their phone, video games, right? So essentially, it's a distraction, but what they're ultimately distracted from is self. Because they're never with self. They're always somewhere else, living externally. Okay? And self is deep, it's spiritual. So this is what I implore the kids to do. And it's very simple. And I tell them, if you can't do this, then you need to look at yourself in the mirror. A very simple exercise. And here's what it is. And adults can do it as well. So what I tell the kids, and I'm going to tell the adults as well, is to carve out 10 or 15 minutes a day, every single day. And if you want to do more, that's great. Carve out 10 or 15 minutes where you are going to sit in silence. All right? Sit in silence. I'm not talking about the silence where you're just meditating and let your mind wander. I'm talking about the silence that's intentional, where you're steering your thinking and your emotions instead of being controlled by your thinking. And it's very difficult if nobody's ever done it because we have this subconscious mind of ours that sends off 60,000 thoughts a day. So it's the kind of thing that takes practice, and practice makes perfect. And what I tell them, a really simple way, starting point, is when you're with self, right, the buried treasure is deep within. It's all there. All of those things we're born with. It's our God-given birthright. All of those resources. But you can't know them or access them if you're never with self. So a good starting point of this 10 or 15 minutes a day is something called attitude of gratitude. So for those 10 or 15 minutes, you're thinking, not just thinking, but you're experiencing through visualization everything that you're grateful for, right? Your family, your friends, your school, food you have on the table, heat you have on the house, right down to the shoes you have on your feet. Because we take these things for granted and we don't know. We don't do it intentionally. And when we start doing that, with intent, not only we're slowly digging deeper and getting to know self, but what we're doing, if we do this on a daily basis, is we are empowering ourselves. It's very, very powerful when your mind is focused on what we're grateful for, right? And what our skills are, what our abilities are, what our talents are, when we're not comparing ourselves with everybody else. And what I tell these kids is, if everybody in the country did that for 10 or 15 minutes a day, In 6 months' time, I would estimate that the mental health epidemic among youth would go down by 90%, just from that exercise. And that's just the starting point. It goes much deeper than that. All right. So the anxiety. I just got on a roll there. So back to the anxiety stuff, right? Which is all external. It's all the stuff going on out here, right? We're falling behind now because of it. We're trying to figure out where you fit in, all these other things. There's another big component to this. So my last year when I was working at the high school, I did my own survey. And we had 1,100 kids in the high school. I was the student assistance counselor. So I didn't do any guidance stuff. I just handled all the other issues. So a lot of times kids would just come down to my office because they just like to hang out during lunch. They like talking to me and stuff. Other kids would come down for help. So, and these are all kids that knew me and trusted me. So over the course of that 1 year period, I did a survey, and I asked all of these kids who trusted me, and I told them, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to answer this question honestly. It's not going to leave here. I'm not using anybody's name. I'm not going to call your parents. And the question that I asked these 100 students was this: what time do you go to sleep on school nights? And 93 of those 100 high school kids told me that they went to sleep between 1 and 4 a.m. every night of the school, every night of the school week, and their parents had no idea. And the reason for that, so here's tip number 1 that I'm going to throw out to all the parents, and the kids are really going to hate me. The reason why our kids are up till those hours of the night is because the phone is in the bedroom. And as much as they consciously know they need to get 8, 9 hours of sleep, and they may tell themselves that they're going to do that, when that phone is next to them, it's designed to make them not be able to do that. Because it targets certain parts of the brain. I'll get into that too in a little bit. So here's the first tip, and I tell the kids this too. That phone should not be in the bedroom at night with our kids. And the excuse is, well, I need it as an alarm clock. I'll tell you what, I'll go on Amazon right now and buy you an alarm clock for $4. But it's just, it's something called FOMO, fear of missing out. So as a result of that, we now have a sleep deprivation epidemic among teenagers in America, to the point where sleep centers are bursting at the seams. Now, just forget about everything I talked about previously. Let's imagine I just started with that and only talked about the sleep deprivation part. That alone is enough to trigger a major mental health crisis. Because an exhausted person, particularly a kid, is a non-functioning person. Emotionally, mentally, academically, mood-wise, all of that stuff. So that's the first thing we have to do. So those things have to get out of that bedroom and at a good hour, and so there's no access to that, so our kids can sleep. All right, where am I going now? All right, so I want to talk a little bit about multitasking now. And by the way, I know this stuff sounds a little frightening, okay? I'm not anti-tech, I love tech. In fact, technology is great. But here's the problem. A glass of wine with dinner, that's great too. 9 glasses of wine with dinner every night, that's a problem. So it's not really the tech that's bad, it's the quantity of time, the addictive nature of it that's bad. All right, so multitasking. Before I get into multitasking, I'm going to show a video, and then we're going to talk about it. So multitasking is task switching. So it's basically, you're watching TV, and then you're looking at your phone, and then you're listening to music, and then you're going over here and doing this. So it's moving from one thing to the next instead of staying focused on one single task. So let's watch this video, and then we'll talk more about that.
The monkey business illusion. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball. The correct answer is 16 passes. Did you spot the gorilla? For people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half missed the gorilla. If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it. But did you notice the curtain changing color or the player on the black team leaving the game? Let's rewind and watch it again. Here comes the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold.
All right, how many people got 16 tests? How many didn't? How many people are not being truthful? All right, how many, raise your hand if you spotted the gorilla. Raise your hand if you didn't. Okay, that's good. Do not raise your hand if you saw the color changing in the curtain or the player leaving the game. So technically, you're not supposed to see the gorilla, or the curtain changing, or the player on the other team leaving the floor. And that's because the directions were count how many passes the players in white, pass the ball. So if this was 15 years ago, probably none of us would see the gorilla, right? Because we'd be so hyper-focused on the task at hand. So I share that for a reason. So there was another professor a number of years ago, when I was doing all my research, I came across this guy. He's unfortunately passed away like 10 years ago. He had a heart attack, unfortunately. His name was Clifford Nass. Look him up on YouTube. He's got videos, a real smart, quirky, fascinating man. So he was a professor at Stanford University, and he was interested in multitasking. Like, is multitasking, is that bad for us? Is it good? Is it neutral? Etc. So he conducted a little experiment with students at Stanford, the brightest kids in the country. So he took two different groups of students. The first group were students that considered themselves low multitaskers. They didn't switch around, they just did one thing at a time. Second group were kids that considered themselves high multitaskers. And the experiment that he had them do, similar to the monkey business illusion, each of them had a tablet in front of them, and it was a little slideshow, like 20 slides, and the instructions were, so on the first, picture the first slide, on the first slide there were two red rectangles and one blue rectangle, kind of like dominoes. So on the first slide, the two red might have been parallel, the blue one might have been below it. And the instructions were to count how many times a red rectangle moves with each ensuing slide. So, for example, on the second slide, one of them might move 45 degrees. What he didn't tell them is that with each ensuing slide, there were going to be more blue rectangles added. There was always going to be two red, but there were going to be more blue. He also had attached to each of their heads a functional MRI device, one of those like portable MRI things where you put the lobes on a person's head, and now you can see the activity taking place in their brain. So he starts off with the low multitasking students. Count how many times one of the red rectangles moves. It's, more blue added, always two red. They all go. They pass with flying colors. And as expected, a small area in the executive functioning part of their brain illuminated, which is exactly what's supposed to happen. On to the high multitasking. They have the MRI device. They do the same experiment. They fail miserably. But what was more shocking was that when he was looking at their, their images, they were using 20 times more brain power. But it wasn't the executive functioning part of their brain that was doing that. It was the visual cortex of their brain, not the part of the brain that can do that task. So essentially, from the chronic task switching, the brains of those high multitaskers became confused from all the visual stimulation and attempted to use a part of itself to do that experiment that's not capable of doing that experiment. So when you think about what I mentioned earlier, the acquired ADHD, kind of makes sense. The good news is, and I have people come to my office and, they'll tell me that, their teenager has been recently diagnosed with attention deficit disorder. And I have to explain to them that there's probably a higher likelihood that your kid does not have ADHD because you would have seen these symptoms when he was, very young. And I'll tell them if you could somehow greatly reduce the electronic intake that their brain is marinating in, then you're likely in about 30 days' time to see those symptoms dissipate and a return of of focus and concentration. All right, where are we headed now? So another thing I want to share. Okay, so I mentioned about not having the phones in the bedroom. So I was doing a lecture before COVID. It was out west somewhere, maybe Oregon. And it was actually a professional development for teachers. So a teacher comes up to me after the lecture and shares with me something that she did with her high school class. An experiment for a 1-hour class period. So she had all of her students take their phones out of their pockets and turn the volume on high. And each of them had a Google Doc in front of them. And they had to for every single alert they got on their phone, they had to tally it up. Like, for example, Facebook, Snapchat, email, text messages, phone calls, Instagram, Twitter. So in that for an hour. So it was like a laser light show, but with audio. Beep, 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 for the entire hour. And in that 1-hour class period, there was well over 1,000 alerts, also known as distractions. So I was telling this to the kids as well. So I'm not sure if every school has different policies with phones. You can't have your phone out, but when you get up to a high school, most of them, you're not allowed to use your phone, but the kids have their phone in their pockets. And they have that phone on vibrate, a lot of them. So even when that phone vibrates, which it is doing literally every 5 seconds in some cases, in the pocket, when that phone buzzes, if that kid is taking, like, let's say AP calculus, there's no possible way that their brain can actually hear and listen to and digest what the teacher was just saying. Because the brain can't do two things at once. So every time that thing is buzzing, that's happening incessantly. So I tell these kids, do yourself a favor, if you have your phone in your pocket during class, put it on silent or do not disturb, and you'll do better academically. Because you cannot, at certain high level, math and stuff like that, even English writing on paper, you got to be dialed in. And every time you get interrupted, you're dialed out, and then you can't do that. It just doesn't work. And I also deal with a lot of kids and families and so forth. And a lot of teenagers, they have their phone right next to them when they're doing their homework, right? And they're going to tell us, well, I need it for school. I'm doing a project with my friends, right? Half the time that's nonsense, right? That is just another distraction. Over the years, if I speak at a public high school, there's always a parent in the audience that's not here to hear me speak. They're here because they have a gripe. With whatever. Right, so the hand will always go up and they'll say, why does my kid get 5 hours of homework a night? And I have to gently say to them, your kid's not getting 5 hours of homework a night. It's taking them 5 hours to do because you're getting distracted every 5 seconds from something else. So that's another tip. The phone, I know you said the phone, when kids are studying and doing homework, shouldn't be in the same zip code. Never mind that code. All right. Gaming. Raise your hand if you think gaming is addictive. Okay. So as of about 4 years ago, the World Health Organization officially recognizes gaming disorder as a diagnosable, classifiable condition. So I can actually diagnose somebody with gaming disorder. And I'm going to give you an example. A few years back, I got a call at my office from a parent, father, says, hey, I heard about you, I live nearby, I want to bring my son in. He's 15, and he's a video gamer. And he goes on to explain to me on the phone that his son, at that point, had not been in school in a year. And Child Protective Services was knocking on his door every week. And that the kid, from 15 hours a day, he plays video games. In the basement. He doesn't even come up for dinner. The parents bring him dinner downstairs. I'm not going to judge anybody. So I say, all right, let's bring him in for an appointment. So they come to my office, and I have this 15-year-old boy, very overweight, beyond pale. I'm Irish, and I have pretty pale skin. This kid was the palest person I've ever seen. He literally had not stepped foot outside, ever, in over a year. So I come in, I meet the kid. The dad tells me the kid has a cholesterol level of 270 at 15 years old, right? I meet with the dad, I meet with the kid, and then when we're done, I have to pull the dad aside. I tell him, I said, listen, I can't help your son. I think I'm pretty good at what I do, but I can't help you something. You could bring him here 3 days a week, he's not going to undo this. And you know what he needs to do. Right? And that's what I think he was hoping I had some kind of a magic wand. That the kid's going to come to my office and going to make him not want to play video games again. So I explained to the dad, you know what the only solution is here. You have to take the Xbox away. You got to get rid of it. And if you do that, prepare for World War III. Because your son is going to go berserk. I don't know if I can do it, blah, blah, blah. So I'm like, this is all I can tell you. This is the only solution. So a couple of weeks go by, I haven't heard from the guy. I get a text message from his dad. And he says, I feel great. I finally did it. I've had enough. I finally got rid of the Xbox. Right? About a half hour after that, I get a phone call from him on my cell phone. I pick it up, and he goes on to explain. He's in a little bit of a panic for that. And he says, my son is going berserk. He took out a knife. He has my $3,500 Fender guitar and is threatening to cut the guitar strings. I said, I'll give him back the video. So now that is not the norm. That's an extreme version of it. But some of the more common things that I see in my office and stuff, I'll get a call from a parent, kid, 11 or 12-year-old, and they'll say, my son, he's so disrespectful, he's cursing at me, he's getting in my face, he's threatening me, he's got 10 holes in his bedroom wall. And then this 11-year-old twerp comes into my office, right? I'm like, this kid? I'm thinking about this kid. So the reason for that behavior, and in my new book, Raising Healthy Teenagers, I did a lot of research on it. Have you ever heard of oppositional defiant disorder? So ODD is a real thing where kids are oppositional and defiant towards authority figures, namely parents. So post-COVID, I've seen an unbelievable amount of that. And while I was doing my research, this is what it comes down to. So, one, that kind of behavior, there's, everything's caught on camera nowadays. Every street corner has a camera, everybody's got a camera in their pocket. So every bad thing that's taking place in our society, murders, carjackings, muggings, all this stuff, everything's now captured on camera, and it funnels right into the tailpipe of the mainstream media, also known as social media. So our kids are seeing this kind of content and behavior incessantly. And the way the brain works, the more you see something over and over again, the more your brain normalizes and actualizes it. So for a lot of kids that don't understand it, that's bad, to treat a parent like that. Second layer of this oppositional defiance stuff is something known as brain homeostasis. So all of the products, all of the social media sites, the video games, the apps, they have very smart engineers behind the scenes and psychologists. So that when they're designing these products, they're designed to target the pleasure-seeking part of the brain that produces dopamine. Dopamine is a feel-good chemical in our brain. You hit a home run, you get a rush of dopamine, right? But our kids, and you don't want to have too much or too little. So if you look at the scale to the left, that would be normal. Brain develops a natural balance, so you don't have too much dopamine or too little. Because when you have too much dopamine, whatever's causing that dopamine, when that's the stimuli that's causing it, when that's removed, there's an absolute withdrawal and crash. So dopamine is associated with every form of addiction, whether it's gambling, drugs, and even this stuff. So our kids are literally like walking around with an IV drip of dopamine constantly, and it's creating that imbalance. Again, the good news is, if you have a kid that's gotten violent and really, really misbehaving and so forth, and if you take away the stimuli, you can see some withdrawal, manifest behaviorally, and all those kids with the holes in the wall, same concept. Parents took the phone away for whatever reason, or the video game system. That was the withdrawal and the crash. But it takes about 30 days for that homeostasis to set back in. So, you have that. It's going to be not going to be good for a week or two, but then your child will come back. Will come back to normal. All right. So another thing I need to talk about is social conformity. All right. So I'm not going to ask anybody to raise their hand, but I've done this many times. I just don't want to put anybody on the spot. Many times over the years, I would say to the audience, raise your hand if you think it is smart for an 11-year-old child to have a smartphone. Right? So never once ever has anybody ever raised their hand and said, yeah, I think that's a good idea.
I got a 6-year-old and a 9-year-old with iPhones, and they probably have them in age 4 or 5. But
Yeah.
one does have ADHD, but that has nothing to do with the phone.
Yeah, not exactly.
But I think it's smart they have it.
Yeah. Well,
They have helping.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll talk about that a little later. So most people would agree it's not a good idea for all the potential consequences, right? But the average age of first smartphone issuance is 10 years old, right? Even though most of us know it's probably not a good idea for the 10 or 11-year-old to have a smartphone, right? But the average age is 10 years old. So the question is, if many of us, not everybody will agree with it, thinks it's a bad idea, then why do they have it? So it kind of starts like this. So I remember my son, he's 20, he'll be 21 in May, my daughter's 17. So my son was born, I'm a new dad. And like every new dad, here's my game plan. All right, my son is going to Harvard, right? He's going to play for the New York Yankees one day. He's never eating McDonald's. He's never going to have a sip of soda in his life. Forget sweets. Right? So this whole mindset our kids are young, we're going to really raise it the right way, right? And that's kind of like everybody's mindset, right? So picture it like this, right? And certainly not getting a phone or playing violent video games before he was appropriate, right? So let's use the violent video games as an example. Rated M video games like Call of Duty is not appropriate for kids under 17, right? So you tell your son over and over, all right, just so you know, you're not playing any rated M video games until you're 17. I don't care what everybody else does. Then your son turns like 9, 10 years old, comes up to you. Hey, Dad, Mark McCormick, got Call of Duty. Can I get it? No, son. You know the rules. I don't care about what McCormick's are doing. These are my rules. A few days later, he comes up to you. Dad, come on. Steven Canzero got it. Sorry, son. Jimmy DiStefano a couple days later. Come on, that Patrick Rooney, right? And then you start to think about this as a parent and say, you know what? I know McCormick's. They're a really good friend. Canzeros, they go to church every Sunday. Maybe it's just me. Plus, I don't want my child to be like that. Maybe I'm overreacting here. Bing, bang, boom. Christmas rolls around. Hanukkah rolls around. There's a whole picture. It's called social conformity. All right? And I'm going to talk about a new social conformity that I created. I talked about it being disconnected. After I show you this video. This is a video about social conformity. So let me explain it first before I get into it. So the one woman in this waiting area is a real person. Everybody else is an actor in the initial beginning of it. So just follow along.
Stop. Pay attention. Take a look at this crowded waiting room. These people may appear to be waiting for the eye doctor, but they're actually waiting for the first test subject in our hidden camera experiment. And here she is, right on time for her 12 o'clock appointment.
Hi, how are you doing?
This woman thinks she's here for a free eye exam.
Have you been here before? No, it's my first time.
What she doesn't know is that everyone else in this room is working for us.
I'll be with you in just a couple minutes.
Today we're running an experiment on social conformity, and the test starts now. Did you hear that? These people sure did. It doesn't take long for our test subject to notice a pattern. Beep means stand up. But why? And if you were in her shoes, what would you do the next time the tone sounds? While you might think you make your decisions all on your own, when it comes to peer pressure, all too often, your brain is just following the crowd. It's all around you, every day, an invisible force you're probably not even aware of. It affects what you do, how you think, and who you are. It's called social conformity, or peer pressure, and while it might not sound like a good thing, it's actually not so bad. The truth is, your brain craves synchronicity and takes comfort in the ease and efficiency of just going with the flow. And whether it's simply knowing what to wear in the morning, supporting your team at the big game, or even marching off to war, we're all programmed to be part of the group. And that's because your brain knows that there's power in numbers. We set up a hidden camera experiment to see if this woman would stand up at the sound of this tone, simply because everyone else is. You might be thinking you'd never go along with this. Or would you? After just 3 weeks, and without knowing why she's doing it, this woman is now conforming perfectly to the group. But what happens if we take the group away?
Elaine, please.
Okay, now she's alone. The crowd is gone, and nobody is watching her, except our hidden cameras. What do you think she'll do? She's now conforming to the rules of the group without them even being there. Now, watch what happens when we introduce another outsider who doesn't know the rules.
Have a seat, and I'll be out in just a couple minutes. Thanks so much.
Think she'll teach the new guy what to do? We get the cameras rolling as more unsuspecting patients arrive. Slowly but surely, what began as a random rule for this woman has now become the social norm for everyone in this waiting room. Here to explain what's going on in their brains is Jonah Berger of the University of Pennsylvania.
This sort of internalized form of herd behavior is part of what we call social learning. Starting at a very early age, when we see members of our group form a task, our brains literally will learn to follow in their footsteps.
When I saw everybody stand up, I felt like I needed to join them. Otherwise, I'm like excluded. Once I decided to go with it, then I felt much more comfortable.
Conformity is how we become socialized, but it can also cause us to develop bad habits or repeat past wrongs.
And it's why even this rebel, who wasn't standing for any of this nonsense, eventually joined the ranks. And the only thing more shocking than seeing how easy...
All right, it's a funny video I know, but just a little bit about social conformity. It is what it is. But, you know, I came up with an idea a number of years ago, a different form, a healthier form of social conformity that I discussed in Disconnected. So imagine, so you know like when you get that packet in the summer from your school with all the paperwork? So imagine you're the parent of a kindergartner or a first grader, right? If you talk to, you know, most parents of kindergartners and first graders, they don't want them having phones yet, right? But imagine you get in that packet, it's just a simple thing, it's not even school policy, it's called the Phone-Free School Pledge. And it just says, I agree not to purchase a smartphone for my child until they have it. I'm betting that parents of younger kids like that are going to say, yeah, that sounds like a really good idea. I'm definitely going to sign it, and then talk to their friends in the community. Are you going to sign that form? Are you going to sign that form? Are you going to sign it? And now you have, you know, people collectively agreeing and talking about it. Then all school would have to do is every so often say, hey, remember, we're a phone-free school. And Some schools are doing that, by the way, some schools I've talked at. It creates a new conformity where if the kids move forward into middle school and stuff, you could potentially have a school where the majority of kids don't have smartphones. Because kids don't want things that everybody else has, they want things that everybody else has. In addition to that, there's a lot of debate about, phones in the school, right? And it's a lot of, some schools, public schools in particular, are very, very hesitant to just ban phones from entering the school building. And even though they know it interferes with education, interferes with socializing in the cafeteria and all this other stuff, it's because the phone has become the umbilical cord for parents. We become dependent on it, knowing where our kids are at every time, What if there's an emergency? I got to get a hold of my kid. I got to pick them up, all these other things. So it's a terrifying proposition for parents to part ways with the phone, right? But if you look at, there are some schools across the country through research that have done just that. They've rolled the dice, flexed their muscles, and so we're not allowing phones in our school. And in every single case, test scores have skyrocketed, mental health episodes have plummeted, socialization has skyrocketed, and the overall everything about the school is just that much better. So I'm a big advocate of that, but I don't make the laws. So if I was in charge of that, I think in England now that's going on the school. And if the argument is, well, how am I supposed to get a hold of my kid? What if there's an emergency? So if, God forbid, there's an emergency, you can't throw in a cape full of Superman and fly over the police barricade. And furthermore, if you have to get a hold of the kid, what is appropriate and doesn't have any social media is something called a Gab wireless phone. Anybody ever heard of that? It's just one brand. Gab, a company called Gab, G-A-B-B, they make a phone that looks just like this, but it's not a smartphone, it's a dumb phone. So all you can do is text message and make phone calls. So that kind of ameliorates the idea of if I have to get a hold of my kid, well, they have it. And they're not going to get lost in the dangerous world of social media, which is so toxic, such a hijacker of the brain and everything. So that's a good starting point. All right, next. Can you get my clicker out? All right, so Aaron. So I have this cited in my book, and I'm not sure I would believe it, but I have the citation for it. So the average parent in modern America spends just 3.5 minutes per week in meaningful conversation with their kids. And the reason for that is because we're on these devices as much as our kids are. So we have to kind of get back to some of the basics, like having dinner together every night without any distractions. And I understand that, you have 2 working parents, it's hard to do that. What I tell folks is that if you can't pull that off and, carve out when everybody is home, whatever time that is, 15 minutes where everybody is sitting around and chatting. It doesn't have to be like, watch your bed on a science test, right? Like that. Just having conversation, right? And research shows that families that do these kinds of things, that have dinner together uninterrupted most nights of the week, the kids in those families are more likely to excel at school, less likely to have a mental health condition, less likely to engage in drug use, less likely to engage in early sexual behavior, and more likely to have a higher earning power by age 30. Because, take a guess what is the most important component of our kids' mental health outcomes? The relationship they have with their parents. And a relationship isn't really a relationship if it's not dialogue and human connection. It's Johnny's in his bedroom, Sarah's downstairs doing her thing, Dad's over here, Mom's over here. And I often say, like, the typical family of 4 now, it's not definitive of what you would see in the dictionary, like Brady Bunch. It's more like 4 individuals that, are family but live under the same roof and don't really spend all that much time together. So for us adults, we have to do a better job as well. That's the next step. We have to practice what we preach. So when we're at home with our kids, we have to do the best we can to be in the presence of them, to love them. Of course we love them, but to express that, because the human connection, is so important. It's not just the verbal dialogue, it's the energetic communication. And it's gotten so bad that when I was working at that high school, my eyes were all over the place. Every time I looked in the rearview mirror of my car, 1,000 kids, one entrance into the school, every time I looked in my rearview mirror, in the passenger seat behind me, in the car behind me, every single time, was this. Kid on the phone. No dialogue. So even those 5-minute rides or 10-minute rides to and from school, that's 180 times a year, that is like fertile ground for developing a strong relationship with our kids. Just every single day doing that, over time after time, this is so important. And that's the most important thing, right? What's everything about? It's about our family. So this is, these are little strategies to really reclaim our families and be together. There's nothing more important. And our kids really, really need us. And in fact, I remember, when there was a first edition of Disconnected that came out in December of 2016. So we had a trip that February, during February break, to go to Aruba. I'd never been to Aruba. And if you ever go to Aruba during February break, all it is an unbelievable amount of families, mainly from New Jersey, because a lot of schools have that week off for February break. So we go to Aruba, we make reservations at this, I think it's called Giovanni's. It's an Italian restaurant, the biggest restaurant I've ever seen. It's an open-air restaurant. It's got to be, it has to feed 1,000 people. So we have reservations, go up to the hostess, and all it is families in this restaurant. So I got my wife and my kids, they're younger, and all this stuff is hot in my head, right? And the hostess says, all right, we're going to take you to table. Of course, it's like a football field away. We have to go through the whole restaurant. And as I'm navigating my way through the restaurant, every single kid in that restaurant, I'm scouring the whole place, every one of them, no matter how old they were, was on either a tablet or their phone. Right? No communication. Right? So I'm saying stuff to my wife quietly, she's telling me something. Right? And we get to the table, and I'm talking more, she's kicking me on the table, be quiet. And then I see a family, right, kind of like right where that gentleman is. I'm sitting here, my wife and kids are here, and it's a couple sitting across from each other, and then 2 kids right next to them, 8 and 6, I'd say, sitting across from each other, with big Beats headphones on, and each had their own iPad phone. So I keep looking over and saying to my wife, can you believe this? And she's kicking me under the table even harder, my shins hurt. And so then after about 15 minutes, I'm looking over and trying to this stuff is all in my head. And I'm thinking, I wish I was walking through that. I wish I had a box of my books and flipping them like frisbees on people's tables, right? And after about 15 minutes, I'm looking over there. I start to wonder, maybe that's not their kids. They're just sitting right close to them or something, right? Because there was never any kind of dialogue. It was like the parents were having a date with 2 invisible people and stuff. But it was shortly thereafter when the server brought the cheese wheel pasta out for the kids, placed it in front of them, neither of them budged. It was then that I realized it was their parents. Because after about 10 seconds of them not even noticing the food in front of them because they were too distracted, it was when the parents were like, "You gonna eat?" And then there was a little bit of that. So even those things are very, very important. Did you have a question?
Yeah, when you usually hang out with your kids, you were looking at everybody else on the phone.
That's a good question. Yeah, I was. You know what? You're right. I failed. That's a good one. So that's not that difficult. So like when you're taking car rides, if you have a 10-hour car ride, you have to let the kids watch a movie. But if it's every second that you're in a car, that's just really important. Dialogue, and it helps build communication skills. All right, so speaking of communications, I'm going to end on this and then give a couple more tips, and then we'll get some questions. All right, EQ and IQ. We all know what an IQ is. Your intelligence quotient. So an IQ is something you're born with. It's fixed. So if you're born with an IQ of 110, if you go read every book in town, you're not getting into a 140. You might be able to bump it up a couple of points, but it's fixed. An EQ is known as your emotional quotient, also known as emotional intelligence. And an EQ is the following. It's the ability to understand one's emotions, the ability to regulate one's emotions, the ability to handle adverse situations and overcome them. It's the ability to empathize with the emotions of others. It's the ability of a recent college graduate who didn't go to that great of a college, who didn't have that great of a GPA, and is fortunate to get a job interview. The ability of that individual to go in there and literally blow those people away by his or her very presence. That's part of our emotional intelligence. Now, emotional intelligence, unlike IQ, is not something you're born with. In fact, having a high EQ is twice as important for life success as having a high IQ. And an EQ is not something you're born with. It's something that is developed through a lot of work. Anybody want to take a guess at what the work is I'm referring to? Face-to-face interaction with other human beings. So we are social, emotional beings. And as social emotional beings, we actually communicate more non-verbally than we do verbally. It's an unconscious endeavor where we pick up on facial nuances, we can feel a person's feelings, right? And all of those things are developed. And the reason why I share that is because, although our kids do socialize, they don't have nearly the amount of actual face-to-face interaction as previous generations. In fact, over the years, I got a lot of teens that I see in my office. And when the school year ends, they go to sleepaway camp for 7 months. And none of the camps are allowed phones in there. And they're having the idea of not having a phone is kind of frightening. And many times when those kids come back from summer camp and the school year starts, the parents call me up and say, I want to get my son or daughter back into counseling every week. And I've asked so many kids the following. I'm being dead honest. I've asked them, I said, what was the best part of sleepaway? You know how many kids told me not having their phone? And you want to know why that is? Because even though they had the idea of having to go there without their phone, after 7 weeks they discovered something that they inherently craved that they didn't know they were. And that's the human connection. Sitting in that cabin, talking, being around the fire, telling stories. It's how we're wired. It's what we need to do. That's another thing we have to figure out too. I know a lot of kids' playgrounds are empty. Play is down 70% in recent years, outdoor play. Got to come up with a strategy to get our kids more green time, more interaction. Let them scrape their knees on the playground. Let the kids take the ball from them. That's how they learn. That's how they develop. Being indoors is not their natural habitat. Speaking of natural habitat, that lion in the cage, right? So if that lion was born in a zoo, it wouldn't be able to be released into the wild. It was born in the zoo and raised there because it would not know how to survive in its natural habitat. It wouldn't know how to hunt or anything like that in order to survive. And I share that as an example because I do hope I'm wrong about this, but if our kids are spending almost every waking moment of their life in another habitat called cyberspace, right? What's going to happen when they have to come back to this habitat and start entering the real world? Again, we are seeing a lot of that. The good news is, here's the positive. A lot of other younger people I see, 25, 26, saw them when they're teenagers, they want to come back, for whatever reasons. A lot of this is a good trend right now. They're deleting their social media, their TikTok and Snapchat and all that, because they're in their career and they want to succeed, and they're realizing that it's just sucking all their time away from them. And it's designed that way. All right, so quickly I went over some of those tips. Phone shouldn't be in the bedroom. We're going to practice what we preach, car rides, all that. We want to get our kids involved, in being members of the household, let them do chores, let them help us cook, all that kind of stuff. If they do stuff after school, get them involved in sports activities, part-time job, all those things is hugely important. If you do get your kid a phone, there's something called, in my book, a cell phone contract, right? The contract that states that your phone is not your phone, it's mine. I'm just leasing it to you for free. That's number one. Number two is if you break it or it falls in the toilet, we're responsible for replacing it. If you go on a certain site that we told you you're not allowed to go on, it's being taken away for this period of time. This way there's some accountability, and when they fail, and they will fail, they'll try to blame you. You can tell them you signed this. You agreed to this, you violated this, I wanted to tell you. And I talked about GAD, on dinner time, all that stuff. Another big thing real quick, if you have a child that is a video game player, it's a good idea for them to not be allowed to play video games during the school week, really Monday through Thursday. Because when they're allowed to play, the rule is you play video games when you finish your homework. Oftentimes, those kids, when they're sitting even in school, when they're trying to listen to the teacher, they can't wait to get home, and all they're thinking about is Fortnite. And then when they do get home, if the rule is you have to finish your homework and your studies before you can play Fortnite, oftentimes, in my experience, they're flying through their homework and studies so that they can get to Fortnite. It's not a test when it's not there. They're more likely to spend more time studying and learning. All right. I think that's it. Any questions? Neural pruning.
Yeah, so I was curious, what is pruning, and do you mean the ability to executive functions, do you mean the ability to connect with people?
Yes. So she was asking about the neural pruning, right? So for example, like being a good communicator, face to face, right? If you're not doing that, right, we have the pathway that's strong, allows us to do that, and that gets stronger from doing that. If an individual is not really doing any of that, then that pathway will become weaker, right? And you're not going to be good at that unless you start to do that. And that's that example right there. I've noticed that because I deal with kids face to face on a daily basis for 24 years. And most of them are good, are decent communicators, but a lot of them aren't. You know, they come in and say certain things, like I'll tell one of my funny jokes and they don't laugh. How can I laugh? Little things like that, but practice makes perfect. So if a kid is not great socially and a good communicator, the more they're in that, the more they'll develop that, the stronger, more bold they'll become. Anybody else? Bueller? Anyone?
I wonder if you can look to address and have it now. Where you have developing adolescents.
Say it one more time.
I want to address your book. Developing adolescents, right? Every single one of us, when you're 13 or 14, silly things go through your head. And with the video, when you suddenly find a community of 1,000 people of the same silliness in their head, instead of just growing out of it, oh, that's my identity. And it totally destroys their proper development and makes them think that they're X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
To discuss in your book.
I don't discuss that. You talk about like transgender stuff?
That's one example.
Yeah, well, I'll give you an
Or you're
example.
developing a taste for focus.
Yeah, I'll talk about both of those things. So I don't talk about that because it's too controversial. Like if you bring it up, like I for example, I was on doing a TV segment, Jesse Waters back like a year ago, and we were talking about transgenderism, right? I was just talking about how the DSM used to be considered a mental health condition. Now it's not. It doesn't say anything bad about it, like I'm anti-transgender. There's some place where I had a lecture scheduled. They called me up and told me I had to cancel it because there was a parent of a first grader that had a transgender child and felt threatened by me coming. Yeah. So anyway, but it was a very recent story of last week, for example. So another kid I was seeing. I've been seeing him for on and off for a while. Nice kid, comes from a really good family. And, just a little, some little insecurities. Good kid, really nice, smart. A little anxiety here and there, and just helping him, really kind of motivated, feel good about himself. So, haven't seen him in a while. Saw him like 3 weeks ago. The mom said he was having a little bit of a difficult time, feel like he had no friends or anything, right? And so I got him propped up, got him in my office, talked about a lot of important things, helping him feel good about himself, digging within himself. Friday, the mom texted me. She's like, I'm freaking out. My son left me a note. He's 8th grade boy. And it says, I'm transgender. So the mom's freaking out. She's like, how is he transgender? He's a baseball player, this, blah, blah, blah. So then they did a little, I met with the kid and just talked to him about different things and so forth, about, what I think professionally is he hasn't really had a friend group. So he felt kind of isolated like the last year, and then hear from him. And sure enough, he's been on Discord for a year and a half now, where he's now been accepted by a group that he feels part of, and is now, to your point, identifying as that. So the parents since then, I was talking to them yesterday, did deeper research, and for the last, they didn't know, for the last year and a half, they were able to go deep into Discord, which is this like social communication site. They wouldn't even repeat the things that they're seeing. And he's communicating with people from all over the country. He's been being groomed. Yeah. And then as far as the TikTok stuff, so just as far as the brain works and beliefs and identity, there was a story a couple of years ago where there were, I don't know how many, but an awful lot of teenage girls that developed motor tics, like somebody with Tourette syndrome, head movement and stuff, right? So in each case, the parents took their daughters to the pediatrician to figure out what's going on. None of them had Tourette syndrome. So the doctors were baffled. They couldn't figure out why these girls were having these fine motor tic issues. So they gathered together all the doctors in the United States, and I think in a few other countries, to try to figure out what was triggering this. And they found what was happening. Trending on TikTok with like millions and billions of views were people with Tourette syndrome, with their kids. And from incessantly watching these videos, their brains began to mimic that. Yeah, so this is the kind of stuff that we're dealing with. So he's talking about the Apple ProVision virtual reality set, right? So I haven't done any research on that, but just based on my background in psychology and the mind and all that. Like the TikTok girls, so if an individual is now spending countless time in a virtual world, which the brain cannot differentiate from, you're reacting. You know, your heart rate's going up. If all of a sudden something happens in this virtual world, it's not real, but you have a physiological reaction to that. So it's going to happen is if their brains, mark my words on this, I don't have any evidence to support this is just my background. People that are using those things over and over again, spending a lot of time there, they're going to lose a sense of what reality is, of what actual reality is. That's not going to be good.
So we're talking about the school getting kids to a degree, especially in a system like this one, part of the school month, so basically, they get all the parents together, all the parents together, to talk about it, and all the parents discussion. They're not going to buy, they're not going to do this children monotone. They do this first grade, second grade, and they push this to the eighth grade. That attack the parents together, and the majority of parents don't, and so the minority follow the majority, and they're pushing it. The goal is instead of relying on school and it's the grassroots, the parents themselves are banding together and they that every year and pushing it. They're doing it in many schools. They're pushing it to see how far they can do it. It might be hard in high school, something that they work on. So the parents themselves are on board and discuss the discussions that we're here. And kids will come home and say, oh, this kid has to do that. No, exactly.
You heard the question was just talking about, when I was talking about that healthier social conformity thing, somebody that started a group of parents collectively have got together. That's now become the norm and the majority. And the minority must be part of the majority, essentially.
One more question.
Yeah. Okay, we'll take one more. And then anybody, when we're done, if anybody has any other questions, email me. I'm going to hang out here for a bit.
In the past, in general, especially ones that are more addictive, to find that healthy balance, is there a way to train the kids to auto-regulate on their own, for them to have a healthy relationship, to make them feel like, I love this stuff, I'm going to turn it off, versus being escaped all the time,
The answer is no. So the reason for that is we have this area of the brain that's called the prefrontal cortex. That's the part of the brain that's responsible for decision-making, risk-taking behavior, impulsivity and stuff. And that part of the brain does not develop until about 25 years old. So it's like when I'm driving home right now on a parkway in the right lane doing 60, 65, and I look at my rearview mirror and I see a car coming up in the left lane doing 90. I know that it's somebody that's 18 or 19 years old in the car, not a 51-year-old guy like me doing it. So, I've spoken to other experts on this. We try to teach our kids to be responsible with it. They're not capable of doing so. It's also not designed for them. It's intentionally designed, to target that part of the brain so they can't resist themselves. So it is up to us to have to do it for them and have regular rules and all that stuff. There are apps you can get if your kid has a phone. Parenting apps that limits it, shuts the phone down, all these other things. And again, it's not that Pakistan thing, but it's designed to suck, just suck them in, and hit them. All right, well, I want to thank everybody.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kersting. Fantastic, very informative. As an adult, as a parent, absolutely fantastic. Just for the Shalom Torah parents, we got together before this event, like you said, to try to work in a positive way to enable our students to have a better relationship or non-relationship with devices. And as a start, this is just the beginning, we hope to develop this further as we go on. As a start, every Tuesday we are starting an initiative called Tech Free Tuesday, where every single Tuesday we are encouraging students not to be on any sort of devices, television, even texting, streaming services, music apps, all of the above. And we will be providing other ideas of what you can do with your child and them not being on the screen or on the device, and giving you ideas and fun activities that you can do to spend quality time with your children. Now, Rabbi Rosenthal went through the classrooms a couple of weeks ago sharing this idea, and they were not stoning him, they were not throwing rocks at him, they were not starting World War III, they were actually very excited about it. Particularly because if your child does have a Tech-Free Tuesday, the next day on Wednesday, it will get a specific prize or a little treat, something like that, every single following Wednesday. And after 6 weeks, we'll be going on a nice, fun, exciting trip for all the students that got the 6 weeks down pat. Under the sheet outside with the exact contest rules, I'll just run through it simply. Basically, if you can just make sure your child does not go on that device. Once they're home on the bus, we definitely cannot necessarily ensure that will take place, but once they're home, to not be on any device the entire night, till the next morning, till they're back in school, so it's really a completely clean night. And then the way for us to be informed is either to join a WhatsApp group, which maybe doesn't sound so good, but there are other ways as well. You can send an email to Rabbi Rosenthal, you can send a note to the teacher that my child was not on any device the night before. They will receive a prize or treat the next morning, and we will tally this down. We'll have a Google sheet, we'll have everybody's name down there, and we'll see after 6 weeks whoever's done this is really amazing. For any more questions, you can contact Rabbi Rosenthal or myself, Ms. Hoberman. Thank you all for joining us. There'll be Ma'ariv right now in the synagogue. So, thank you.